January 14, 1945. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The cold was a physical weight. It pressed down on the shoulders of Sergeant Frank Bull Miller, turning his joints into rusted hinges. Frank stood in the open turret of his tank destroyer. It was an M36 Jackson. To the uneducated eye, it looked like a tank. It had tracks, armor, and a gun. But to Frank, it was a convertible coffin. The M36 had no roof. The turret was open to the sky, designed to save weight and give the crew visibility. In the summer, it was breezy. In the winter of 1945, it was a freezer. "Temperature is dropping, Sarge," called out Corporal Danny Scope Rossi, the gunner. He was huddled over the breech of the massive 90mm gun, rubbing his hands together to keep the feeling in his trigger finger. "Forget the cold?" Frank growled, his breath pluming in the air like dragon smoke. "Check the sight again. If the optics fog up, we're dead." Frank looked out over the valley. They were parked on a ridgeline known as Hill 402, overlooking a long, snow-covered pasture that stretched for 3 miles toward the German lines. Below them, buried in foxholes, was a company of American infantry. They were terrified. Intelligence reports had confirmed the worst. The 1st SS Panzer Division was moving this way. And they weren't bringing the old Panzer IVs. They were bringing the nightmares. King Tigers. The Tiger II. 70 tons of Krupp steel. Frontal armor so thick, 150mm, that standard American tank shells bounced off it like ping-pong balls. Its 88mm gun could kill a Sherman from 2 miles away. "We shouldn't be here, Sarge." The loader, a nervous kid named Jenkins, whispered. "We're a tank destroyer unit. We're supposed to shoot and scoot. We aren't supposed to hold a line against Koenigsteigers." "We aren't holding the line, Jenkins," Frank said, adjusting his binoculars. "We're erasing it. The equalizer." The M36 was the American answer to the Tiger. It carried the 90mm M3 gun. It was the biggest gun the U.S. Army had put on a chassis during the war. It fired a shell the size of a man's leg. But the M36 had a glass jaw. Its armor was paper-thin. A German 20mm cannon could punch through it. A sniper could shoot the crew from a tree. "If they see us, we burn," Frank reminded his crew. "That's the rule. We strike first or we don't strike at all." Frank had spent the last 6 hours preparing the position. They weren't just parked. They were invisible. They were hull down behind a stone wall. Frank had ordered the crew to paint the entire vehicle with whitewash made from crushed chalk and water. Then they had draped white bedsheets, stolen from a bombed-out farmhouse, over the barrel. They had cut pine branches and woven them into the camouflage netting. From 100 yards away, the M36 looked like a snowdrift. From 3,000 yards away, the distance to the tree line, it was a ghost. The rumble, 8 o'clock hours. The ground began to vibrate. It started as a low hum, felt in the boots rather than heard in the ears. Then came the squeal of steel tracks on frozen asphalt. "Here they come," Scope whispered, pressing his eye to the telescopic sight. Out of the mist at the far end of the valley, the monsters emerged. 1, 2, 3. 3 King Tigers. They moved with an arrogant slowness. They knew they were the kings of the battlefield. They were supported by 2 Panther tanks and a half-track of infantry. Frank did the math in his head. The range was extreme. They were currently 3,200 yards out, almost 2 miles. Standard engagement range for tanks was 800 yards. At 3,000 yards, a tank is a dot. "They're out of range, Sarge," Jenkins said, his voice trembling. "Let them get closer." "If they get closer," Frank said, "they'll spot the infantry. They'll start using high-explosive shells on our boys down there." Frank looked at Scope. Danny Rossi had been a physics major at MIT before the draft. He didn't just aim, he calculated. "Scope," Frank said calmly, "can you hit the lead Tiger from here?" Scope adjusted the elevation wheel. He checked the windage. There was a stiff crosswind blowing from the east. 3,200 yards, Scope mumbled. "Shell travel time will be nearly 3 seconds. Coriolis effect is negligible. Wind drift is the problem." Can you hit it? Frank repeated. Scope grinned. It was a tight, dangerous grin. I can put a round through his headlights, Sarge. The waiting game. The German column advanced. The lead King Tiger stopped. The commander opened his hatch and scanned the ridge with binoculars. He saw nothing. Just snow, trees, and a stone wall. He felt safe. No American tank could touch him at this distance. Even if they fired, the shell would lose so much velocity it would just scratch his paint. He didn't know about the M36. And he didn't know about the HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing round that Jenkins had just shoved into the breach. HVAP loaded. Jenkins shouted. Breach up. The HVAP round was a tungsten dart wrapped in a lightweight carrier. It flew faster than sound. It flew faster than fear. Target. Lead Tiger, Frank commanded. Aim for the turret ring or the lower glassy plate. Don't hit the mantlet. It's too thick. Targeting, Scope said. His breathing slowed. He became one with the optics. The crosshairs settled on the tiny gray shape in the distance. Scope elevated the gun slightly to account for the massive drop over 2 miles. On the way, Scope whispered. The shot heard round the world. Crack. The 90mm gun roared. The muzzle brake diverted the gas sideways, kicking up a massive cloud of snow around them. The recoil rocked the 30-ton vehicle backward. Reload! Frank screamed. The crew ignored the smoke. They watched the tracer. For 3 agonizing seconds, the shell arced through the gray sky. It looked like a red meteor. The German commander in the lead Tiger was just about to drop back into his turret to light a cigarette. Clang. The sound was like a church bell being hit by a freight train. The HVAP round struck the Tiger. It didn't bounce. It hit the shot trap, the curved lower part of the turret mantlet. The shell deflected downward, punched through the thin roof of the driver's compartment, and detonated inside the tank. A split second later, the hatches of the King Tiger blew open. A pillar of white flame shot 50 feet into the air as the ammunition cooked off. Chaos. Direct hit. Jenkins screamed. We got him. We got the big bastard. Stay focused. Frank yelled. They don't know where it came from. Scope, second target. The Panther on the left. Down in the valley, the Germans were in panic mode. They had just lost their invincible leader to a shot from nowhere. The remaining tanks began to rotate their turrets wildly. They were looking for a muzzle flash. But the snow kicked up by Frank's gun had blended perfectly with the wind-blown powder on the ridge. They were looking for a tank 800 yards away. They weren't looking for a sniper 2 miles away. They think it's an air attack, Frank realized. They're looking at the sky. Target acquired, Scope said. Panther. Side profile. He's turning. Send it. Crack. Another thunderous roar. Another tracer streak. The Panther was moving, which made the shot harder. But Scope had anticipated the movement. The shell hit the Panther just above the road wheels, right in the ammunition storage. The Panther didn't burn. It exploded. The turret, weighing 8 tons, was thrown into the air like a toy, landing upside down in the snow. The hunted. Now the Germans knew. This wasn't an air attack. This was direct fire. The remaining King Tiger commander was a veteran. He saw the faint puff of smoke on Hill 402, 3,000 yards away. He couldn't believe it. Americans? Shooting from there? He slewed his massive 88mm gun toward the ridge. Sarge! Jenkins yelled. The big one. He's looking right at us. Frank looked through his binoculars. He was staring down the black barrel of the King Tiger. It looked like a tunnel to hell. He's ranging us, Frank said. He has to guess the distance. Scope, hit him before he fires. I'm trying. Scope spun the handwheels. He's hull down. I can only see his turret. To kill a King Tiger from the front, hitting only the turret at 3,000 yards was a 1 in a million shot. If they missed, the 88mm return fire would vaporize them. The King Tiger fired. They saw the muzzle flash. Incoming! Frank ducked. The German shell screamed overhead. It missed by 20 feet, exploding behind them in the trees. The shockwave rattled Frank's teeth. He missed long. Frank shouted. He thinks we're further back. Fire. Fire now. Scope didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for the perfect solution. He fired on instinct. The 90mm gun bucked. The shell flew true, but it didn't hit the armor. It hit the barrel of the King Tiger's gun. There was a shower of sparks. The German gun tube was bent, shattered by the impact of the tungsten dart. The Tiger was toothless. Driver, reverse, Frank ordered. Position compromised. Move to firing point Baker. The M36 roared backward, its engine whining, slipping away from the ridge just as 3 more German high-explosive shells hammered the spot where they had been standing seconds ago. They were alive. 3 kills in 2 minutes. But as they relocated through the woods to their secondary position, Frank looked at the map. That was the vanguard, Frank said grimly. That was just the scouting party. He pointed to the valley floor. Through the smoke of the burning Tigers, more shapes were emerging. Dozens of them. The main assault force had arrived, and Frank had only 14 armor-piercing shells left. January 14, 1945. 9:30 hours. Position Baker. Position Baker was nothing more than a depressed logging road shielded by a thicket of frozen pine trees. It offered a flank shot on the valley floor, but it was closer, much closer. The M36 Jackson backed into the shadows. The engine idled with a low, throaty rumble, the exhaust melting the snow behind them. "Kill the engine," Frank ordered. "Sound carries." The silence returned. But it wasn't empty silence. It was heavy. "Sarge," Jenkins whispered, clutching a 90mm shell to his chest like a baby. "How many HVAP rounds left?" 4, Frank lied. They had 2. The rest were standard armor-piercing, AP, and high-explosive, HE. Against a Panzer IV, standard AP was fine. Against the frontal armor of a King Tiger, it was like throwing rocks. The fog of war. The weather, which had been their ally, now turned traitor. A dense, freezing fog began to roll down from the hilltops. Visibility dropped from 3 miles to 300 yards. "I can't see them, Sarge," Scope Rossi complained, wiping the telescopic sight with a rag. "The optics are useless. It's like looking into a bowl of milk." "If we can't see them," Frank said grimly, "they can't see us. We listen." They sat in the open turret, ears straining. The cold was biting now, numbing their fingers. Clank, squeak, clank. The sound of tracks. "Close. Right flank," Frank whispered. 3 o'clock. "That's not a tank," Scope whispered back. "That sounds light. Half-track." Frank peeked over the rim of the turret. Through the swirling mist, a gray shape emerged. It wasn't a half-track. It was a Puma armored car. A scout. Its long 50mm gun was sniffing the air, rotating left and right. If the Puma saw them, it would radio the Tigers. "Do we take it?" Scope asked, his hand on the traversing wheel. "No," Frank hissed. "The 90mm flash will give us away to the whole valley. Let it pass." The Puma rolled past them, only 150 yards away. The German commander was standing in the hatch, looking the other way. Frank held his breath. Jenkins closed his eyes. Suddenly, the Puma stopped. The commander looked down at the snow. He saw something. Tracks. The fresh, wide tracks of the M36 leading into the bushes. The Puma's turret whipped around toward them. "He sees us," Frank screamed. "Hit him with the 50. Frank grabbed the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the back of the turret. He didn't wait for Scope to traverse the main gun. He opened fire. The heavy caliber bullets chewed through the thin armor of the Puma. The German commander collapsed. Sparks flew from the engine deck. The Puma caught fire. Its horn stuck on a mournful, dying blare. "Move!" Frank yelled. "Driver! Get us out of here. They know where we are." The trap. The M36 lurched forward, breaking cover. As soon as they left the trees, the fog seemed to explode. Whoosh! A high-velocity shell screamed past their turret, the shockwave knocking Jenkins to the floor. "Contact front. Tank!" Frank looked ahead. Emerging from the fog, like a ghost ship, was a Jagdpanther. It was a tank destroyer just like them, but it had sloped armor that made it almost impenetrable from the front, and it carried the same deadly 88mm gun as the King Tiger. It was blocking the road. Range, 400 yards. "Stop!" Frank yelled. "Driver, halt!" The M36 skidded to a stop on the icy road. They were face to face. A duel at point-blank range. "Gunner! Sabo!" Frank shouted, referring to the HVAP. "Loaded!" Jenkins screamed. "Fire!" Scope pulled the trigger. Boom! The 90mm roared. At 400 yards, the shell hit instantly. It struck the Jagdpanther's sloped front glassy plate. Ping! Sparks showered the German tank. The shell ricocheted. It bounced off the sloped armor and flew harmlessly into the sky. "It bounced!" Jenkins wailed. "It didn't go through." "He's angling!" Scope yelled. "I can't get a flat shot." The Jagdpanther's gun was lowering. The German gunner was adjusting. He wouldn't miss at this range. "Driver! Hard left! Into the ditch!" Frank commanded. The driver slammed the stick. The M36 pivoted just as the Jagdpanther fired. Crash! The German shell hit the ground right where the M36 had been a second before. The explosion showered the open turret with frozen mud and shrapnel. A piece of metal sliced Frank's cheek open. "We can't penetrate him from the front," Scope yelled, wiping mud from his eyes. "We need a side shot." "We can't flank him," Frank shouted back. "The snow is too deep." They were trapped. The Jagdpanther was reloading. It was a race against death. The gambit. Frank looked at the terrain. To their left was a steep embankment leading down to a frozen creek. It was a 20-foot drop. "Driver!" Frank keyed his mic. "Go over the edge." "Sarge?" The driver's voice cracked. "We'll flip. Go. Now." The driver floored it. The 30-ton tank destroyer launched itself off the road and down the embankment. They slid, tracks screaming, crashing through saplings and rocks. The tank tipped dangerously, nearly rolling over, but gravity pulled it upright at the last second. They slammed onto the frozen creek bed with a bone-jarring thud. Above them, on the road, the Jagdpanther crept forward. His gun was pointing down the road, looking for the kill. It didn't know they had gone down. "Traverse rear," Frank ordered. "He's right above us. Shoot through the floor." "What?" "Shoot up through his floor armor. It's the thinnest part." Scope spun the turret around. The gun barrel pointed up at a steep angle toward the lip of the embankment. The Jagdpanther's tracks appeared at the edge of the cliff. It was looking down. "Fire!" Scope fired a standard AP shell. The shell entered the underside of the Jagdpanther, right between the road wheels. It punched through the thin belly armor and detonated inside the fighting compartment. The German tank shuddered. Smoke poured out of the hatches. It didn't explode, but it stopped moving. It was dead. "Target destroyed," Scope breathed, his hands shaking. "Good shot, kid." Frank wiped the blood from his cheek. "Now get us out of this hole." The swarm. They crawled along the creek bed, using the low ground to stay hidden. But the noise of the battle was growing louder. The fog was lifting slightly, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The valley floor wasn't empty anymore. It was a parking lot of German armor. There were at least 20 tanks. Mark IVs, Panthers, and 2 more King Tigers. They were advancing in a wedge formation, pushing toward the American lines. "We can't stop that," Jenkins whispered. "We're one gun. We have 6 rounds left." "We don't have to stop them," Frank said, his eyes scanning the enemy formation. "We just have to stop him." He pointed to the center of the formation. There was a command tank, a Tiger Eye, painted with distinctive white stripes. It had extra radio antennas. "That's the battalion commander," Frank said. "If we take him out, the attack stalls. They'll lose coordination. He's in the middle of the pack." "Sarge," Scope argued. "He's got 3 tanks protecting him. We can't get a shot." "We can if we make them move," Frank said. "We need a distraction. The suicide run." Frank grabbed the radio. Base, this is Ghost 1. Fire mission. Coordinates. Danger close. Ghost 1, this is base. The radio crackled. We have no artillery available. It's all allocated to Bastogne. Damn it! Frank slammed the receiver. We're on our own. He looked at his crew. They were exhausted, freezing, and scared. Listen up, Frank said softly. We can retreat. We can go back to the ridge and wait for air support. But if we do, those tanks will overrun the infantry company in 10 minutes. Those boys in the foxholes don't have anti-tank guns. Jenkins looked at the floor. Scope looked at the gun breech. What's the plan, Sarge? Scope asked. We go loud, Frank said. We drive up out of this creek, right into their flank. We hit the lead tank to make them scatter. Then we put a round into that command Tiger. And then, Jenkins asked, then we pray the engine is faster than their turret rotation. Frank grinned. It was a grim, wolfish grin. Driver, Frank commanded. Get us up the bank. Flank speed. The M36 roared. It clawed its way up the icy bank of the creek, engine screaming. They crested the rise. Suddenly, they were in the open field. The entire German column was to their right, 800 yards away. The Germans were stunned. They saw a lone American tank destroyer burst out of the woods, drifting sideways in the snow, charging toward them. Target Lead Panther, Frank yelled. Fire! Boom! The shot took the lead Panther in the side. It erupted in flames. The German column halted. Turrets began to swing toward the crazy American. Target Command Tiger. Range 900. Identified, Scope yelled. But as Scope lined up the shot, a shell from a Panzer IV slammed into the ground 10 feet in front of the M36. The blast shattered the track on the right side. The M36 spun violently to the right and stopped dead. They were immobilized, in the middle of an open field, with 20 German guns turning toward them. We're tracked, the driver screamed. I can't move. Frank looked at the command Tiger. The German commander was turning his turret toward the crippled M36. It was a race. Who could fire first? Scope! Frank roared. Take the shot. Take the damn shot. Scope looked through the sight. His hands were steady now. The fear was gone. There was only the math. The crosshairs settled on the Tiger's ammo rack. On the way. January 14th, 1945. 10:15 hours. The killing field. Time didn't just slow down. It shattered. Inside the immobilized M36 Jackson, the air smelled of cordite, sweat, and impending death. On the way, Scope Rossi screamed. Boom! The 90mm gun kicked back so hard it nearly tore the mounting bolts from the turret ring. The breech block slammed open, ejecting the smoking brass casing onto the floor with a metallic clang. The shell, a standard armor-piercing round, their last one, screamed across the 900 yards of snow-covered field. The German command Tiger fired a split second later. The two shells passed each other in midair like indifferent travelers on a highway. The German shell flew high. The M36 was sitting at an odd angle because of the broken track, and the German gunner had miscalculated the slope. The 88mm round passed inches over Frank's head, the shockwave sucking the air out of his lungs. It exploded in the trees behind them, showering the open turret with splinters and frozen dirt. But Scope's shell did not miss. It struck the command Tiger exactly where Frank had ordered, the flat vertical plate of the superstructure, right between the hull machine gun and the driver's viewport. Crunch. The Tiger shuddered violently, stopped dead. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a jet of white flame shot out of the commander's hatch like a blowtorch. The ammunition inside had detonated. The turret, weighing 11 tons, was lifted 3 feet into the air by the force of the internal explosion before crashing back down askew. Direct hit, Jenkins screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. He's cooking off, the wrath of the pack. But the celebration lasted exactly 2 seconds. The command Tiger was dead, but the rest of the German column was very much alive. And now they were angry. Traverse left, Frank yelled. Panther at 10 o'clock. We're out of AP. Jenkins shouted, frantically digging through the ammo rack. We only have high explosive left. Load it. Frank roared. Shoot his tracks. Blind him. Just shoot. Before Jenkins could load, a Panzer IV on the right flank fired. Wham! The shell hit the M36 on the front glassy plate. It didn't penetrate the sloped armor, but the impact was like being hit by a wrecking ball. The transmission casing cracked. The interior filled with acrid smoke. Bail out, Frank ordered. Go, go, go. This wasn't a movie. There was no time for heroics. The tank was a steel trap, and the hunters were closing in. Scope and Jenkins scrambled out of the open turret, diving into the snow. The driver, terrified, popped his hatch and rolled out onto the frozen mud. Frank was the last one out. As he vaulted over the side, a machine gun burst from the German lines, stitched the side of the turret, sparks flying inches from his legs. He hit the ground hard. Into the crater, Frank yelled, grabbing Jenkins by the collar and dragging him toward a shell hole 10 yards away. They tumbled into the crater just as a second shell from a Panther tank hit the M36. Kaboom! Their tank destroyer, their home for the last 6 months, vanished in a ball of fire. The fuel tanks went up. The remaining shells cooked off, sending the turret spinning into the air. The infantry fight. Frank, Scope, Jenkins, and the driver lay at the bottom of the crater. They were covered in mud and soot. Their ears were ringing. Is everyone okay? Frank gasped. My arm, the driver whimpered. He was clutching his left shoulder. It was dislocated from the fall, but not shot. Frank peered over the rim of the crater. The German tanks were advancing. They were rolling right past the burning wreck of the M36. Behind them came the infantry, SS Grenadiers in white winter camouflage, carrying MP-40 submachine guns. They're coming to finish us, Scope whispered, pulling his Colt .45 pistol from his holster. It looked pathetic against a tank army. We hold them here, Frank said, pulling the pin on a grenade. If they want us, they have to pay for us. The ground shook as the heavy tanks rumbled closer. The squeal of tracks was deafening. Frank looked at the sky. It was still gray, heavy with fog. No air support. No artillery. This is it, boys, Frank said softly. It's been an honor. He gripped the grenade. He waited for the first white helmet to appear over the rim. The sound of angels. Then he heard it. It wasn't the clank of tracks. It was a low, throbbing growl. A rumble that came not from the earth, but from the clouds. Grrr! It sounded like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas in half. Frank looked up. The fog bank suddenly tore open. A shaft of sunlight pierced through the gloom like a spotlight from God. And diving out of that hole in the clouds were 4 silver shapes. P-47 Thunderbolts. The Jug. The flying tank. Air support. Jenkins screamed, pointing at the sky. The Jugs are here. The lead plane leveled off at treetop height. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns opened up. Bray up. The sound was apocalyptic. The tracers chewed up the ground in front of the German column. The German infantry scattered, diving into ditches. The tanks stopped, their commanders buttoning up their hatches in panic. But the P-47s weren't done. The lead pilot pulled up, banked hard, and revealed the payload under his wings. Rockets. Giving hell. Frank roared, standing up in the crater and waving his arms. The P-47s dove again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Rockets streaked down from the sky. One hit a Panther tank directly on the engine deck. It exploded instantly. Another hit a half-track, flipping it over like a toy. The German column, which had been an unstoppable iron fist seconds ago, turned into a chaotic mess of burning metal and fleeing men. The retreat. The surviving German tanks threw their transmissions into reverse. They popped smoke grenades, trying to hide from the Silver Hawks above. But the fog had lifted. There was nowhere to hide. A second flight of P-47s arrived, dropping 500-pound bombs on the retreating armor. The earth heaved. Frank and his crew watched from their crater as the invincible SS Panzer Division was dismantled piece by piece. Within 10 minutes, it was over. The valley was silent, save for the crackling of burning tanks and the distant drone of the aircraft circling like vultures. The aftermath. January 14th, 12 o'clock hours. An American jeep drove up to the crater. A captain from the infantry company jumped out. "Are you the guys from the tank destroyer?" the captain asked, looking at the four dirty, bloodied men climbing out of the hole. "That was us," Frank said, lighting a cigarette. His hands were finally steady. The captain looked at the burning wreck of the M36. Then he looked at the valley floor. He counted the kills. 3 king tigers, the captain noted. 2 panthers. 1 puma. And you broke their command structure. He looked back at Frank with wide eyes. "You guys stopped a whole damn offensive. How did you do it with that tin can?" Frank looked at Scope. Scope shrugged, cleaning his glasses. "We just shot straight, sir," Scope said. Frank walked over to the wreck of his tank. The barrel of the 90mm gun was blackened and twisted, pointing at the sky. It looked like a tombstone. He patted the hot metal of the hull. "She was a good girl," Frank whispered. Epilogue. May 1945. Germany. The war ended 4 months later. Frank Bull Miller and his crew were given a new M36, but they never named it. To them, there was only one ghost. They were awarded the Silver Star for their actions at Hill 402. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against superior enemy forces." But the real reward came years later. At a reunion in 1980, Frank met a former German tanker who had been in that valley. The German was an old man now, walking with a cane. "We never saw you," the German said, shaking his head. "We thought we were fighting a whole battery of anti-tank guns. We called you Das Gespenst." "The ghost?" Frank asked. "Ja," the German smiled. "The ghost of the Ardennes." Frank smiled back. He thought of the cold, the fog, and the 90mm gun that had roared defiance when the world was ending. "We weren't ghosts," Frank said. "We were just 4 guys who didn't want to walk home."